Okay. Ken, I need to establish a couple of things here consistent with the release and the first couple of questions. So, how would you like to be named? You want Kenneth W. or Ken or what?
Kenneth W.
Kenneth
is
W. Okay.
my signature.
Okay. And birthday, sir?
Birthday is July 27th, 1933. I'm 85 years old.
Wow. You were born in Peoria?
I was born in Morton, Illinois, actually out in the country from Morton.
Born in Morton.
Without benefit of a doctor.
Midwife?
Midwife.
And was that true for your brother, your siblings?
Well, I was the only one that was born at home.
Okay.
And the rest were all born in hospitals. But I have a sister that's 3 years younger, and she lives in Pontiac, Illinois.
And then Steve.
I had another brother, William, who died at 23 with his arteries had not developed from birth, and he blew out one of those arteries and passed away. I have a younger brother that's 17 years younger, and that's Stephen Aupperle, and I had the pleasure of naming Stephen. At that time, it was after a comic book character, and it was a good. It was Steve Roper, and he was.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
Steve is running the business now, and we're 113 years old.
And you have a fourth generation with Bill in the business.
Mm-hmm. His son is taking over from him. So.
And you and I had talked once before a little bit about your family's immigration. As I recall, you told me Bavaria.
It was near Alsace-Lorraine, which is in the Bavarian area. And well, looking back, we had ancestors that Aupperle was spelled with a Y on the end. And if it was pronounced with that, it would be Aupperle, which sounded a little too French for my grandfather, and the Y was dropped.
Were they Swiss German by any chance originally?
Well, further back than my grandfather was either his father or his grandfather came from Switzerland, and religion was a problem in Switzerland at that time, and so that person decided to go to Germany and start a church in Germany. And he walked from his home in Switzerland all the way to Germany, and along the way, in order to survive, he learned the trade of making shoes, and he would stop at a farmhouse and make a pair of shoes for the owner, and the owner would give him a meal and let him sleep all night and off the next day. So he got his church built, and there wasn't much record of what happened to him after that. But
would he have been an Anabaptist, do you think? Is that why he left?
The religion that we ended up with was Apostolic Christian.
Okay.
And
so it was an Anabaptist.
Actually, Apostolic Christian might be a little breakaway from Catholics, I think.
Actually, they all grew out of the Anabaptist movement, Amish and Apostolics. Okay, well, that all makes sense. So we talked a little bit about up to that point. Then the next somewhere, a generation down or 2 generations down, somebody packed up and came to the United States. How did that happen?
My grandfather's father passed away when my grandfather was 2 years old. My grandfather also had a sister that was a small child, probably less than a year old. And it was very difficult for the widow to maintain 2 children in Germany at that time. And my grandfather's mother was worried that he would be drafted into the army. And so he was 15 years old, and she made arrangements for someone in Ohio to pay for his trip to the U.S. And for that, he had to work on this person's farm for 2 years. He turned 16 on the trip to the United States. He said he had about the equivalent of $5 in his pocket and couldn't speak a word of English. He grew up to be a successful businessman, and he never had any hint of a foreign sound to when he talked. He was young enough at 16. He learned English the way we all do. So
this was Gottlob.
That was Gottlob. Yeah.
Okay.
Later on, he brought his mother back here, and she was young enough. She fell in love with an individual, and they purchased ground in Mexico, and she lived her life in Mexico after her son brought her back here, and she's buried in Tampico, Mexico.
Oh. That's fascinating. So how then did Gottlob wind up in Morton?
Gottlob had no relation here that was known. The sister of Gottlob's future wife lived in Morton. Matter of fact, 2 sisters lived in Morton. One of them was married to a man named William Muschel, and the other was married to a man by the name of Schick. I don't know the first name. So that brought Gottlob to Morton. He had 2 people that he had 2 years to get acquainted with. And after he had established himself here in Morton, he went back to Ohio and married the daughter of the farmer that he worked for 2 years. Now, that was Anna Zimmerman, and Anna Zimmerman and her 2 sisters went to church together here. William Muschel became quite wealthy and owned several businesses in downtown Morton. He owned a grain elevator. He owned a drugstore. Him and a man named Bauman were developers, and to help in the development, he donated 4 acres of ground for the first high school, and he built his house in that general area too.
Do you remember the spelling of Muschel?
Moschel. My 5th grade teacher was Anna Muschel, was some relation of his.
Okay. All right. And the Schick family you mentioned is the Schick family that's
The
still
Schick
here?
family, apparently that husband of well, it would be a brother-in-law to Gottlob, passed away at a young age, and so did William Muschel. William Muschel had a ruptured appendix and died in his 50s. So
But that Schick family is the Schicks that are still around here.
They had one child, and that child never married, so that
probably
was
not.
that was the end of it.
Okay. And then your grandfather ultimately started the construction business after being a farmer, a farm laborer.
Yes, Gottlieb bought farm ground, and he eventually, at his death, owned over 400 acres of farm ground. But he bought a farm that was already established. It belonged to the Ackermans, who were a good friend of Gottlieb's, and helped finance him through this. And he started to remodel the buildings, the farm buildings, with concrete.
Yep.
And that's how he got in the concrete business. Other farmers saw what he did, and yeah, we found one building. He always put the date in the concrete foundation whenever he remodeled a barn, and the oldest one we could find was 1905, and that's the date we used for the company.
Now, I remember right. You told me, with the exception of your term in the service, you spent all your life here.
When I was in the Army, I went to Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
But you, other than that, you've not lived anywhere but Morton.
No, I never lived anywhere but Main Street. And my present, the home that I built after I married, I lived there 55 years.
That's the one across the tracks on Main?
That's at Main and Lakeland.
Oh, Main and Lakeland, okay. And when you went back to Germany, you told me, I think, that you found family members there and visited with
Yes, I did. It was, my wife and I went on a tour of Europe in 1995. And after that tour, we met a couple from Morton that lived in Germany, and the wife was a German citizen, and that's Jim and Hannah Vernon. Jim Vernon is well known now because of his saving those kids at the library.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So they helped us tour Germany and find all the Aupperles that we knew of, and I found Gottlieb's house that he grew up in for 15 years, and I asked Hannah, how am I going to find another Aupperle? She said, just go up and knock on somebody's door.
Yeah.
And then ask them. So I did, and the lady said, well, I was an Aupperle before I married, and she welcomed us in and had us drink her plum brandy that she made, and we had a fine talk, and I learned about all of the Gottlieb's brothers, that none of them came to the U.S.
You speak German?
I speak German because I was in Germany a year and a half. Yeah.
Did anything come out of those visits that enlightened you
Yes.
about the immigration?
Yes, and some of the relation that we met with were in the business of making soft drinks, and they apparently were fairly wealthy because they had a brand new house and a sports car, and but they came here to the U.S. and they wanted to see Gottlieb's house in the U.S.
Oh.
In 1927, Gottlieb built a new house on the farm that he had, and so they were very excited with that house because it was so well built. Yeah, by that time it was already 70 years old or so. And I still correspond with them today.
Going back to your growing up period, what are some of the things that you reflect on or come to mind, stick in your mind about your early years in Morton?
About my early years?
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit, my dad had a brother that took over the farm after my grandfather passed away, and that uncle took me out to where the Morton Optimist Club was located. And I was a little boy, but I noticed there was a log cabin there, and I found out that that log cabin was the home of a man by the name of Crosby. Crosby was one of Morton's very first occupants, and that building served as a church for a minister that came along in the late 1830s, I think it was. Well, the Optimists preserved that building. They built a new building for themselves in 1949, I think, or late 40s. And they did trap shoot out there, if you know what trap shoot is.
Sure do.
And they used that log cabin to hold live turkeys, geese, and ducks that were awarded to the best trap shooters.
Right.
And my job, being a little kid, was to go in that building and grab whatever animal they wanted me to bring out. And so that was my first experience with the Morton Optimist. Morton Optimist started around 1930, and they are still in business today of helping children and Boy Scouts. And they do a lot that people don't know about. That.
You said the cabin served as a church. Do you remember what church it was?
What
church? The cabin?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
But it was not
It was the only church.
Okay. What else do you remember about growing up here?
Well, I was fortunate enough to join the Optimists when I became of age. I became their historian. I've done a complete history on them. I was elected president of the Optimists 2 different times. I got their membership up to 80, which was the most that the fire department would let us put in another new building that we built. I just can't say enough good about the Optimists, because they're teaching young boys how to take care of themselves if they were ever out. And I actually was the one that went and negotiated with the Crosby family to buy the property. We bought 8 acres. We sold 4 of those acres to the brand new Morton Park District, and I happened to be on the Park District when we bought those. So I got my finger in a lot of different things there. I'm the historian for the American Legion, the VFW, the Optimists, Aupperle Construction. I like history.
Well, so do I.
And that's why we're right here.
So your other family members, into your generation anyway, one of the questions about other accomplishments, but, in your case, they're pretty evident, because you've grown the business.
Yes.
And as a prominent, highly respected Morton business that basically has involved your whole family, right?
Yes. I have a son, was the firstborn. He is an engineer, but he was so close to my brother Steve's age, he knew that he would probably never be able to take over the company. So he moved to Austin, Texas, has his own engineering company, and he just celebrated his 62nd birthday, and he is semi-retired.
Ah, okay. And then Steve, so you served in the Army in...
Steve was in
50s.
Vietnam.
Steve was in Vietnam.
Yes, I was in during the Korean conflict.
Were you in Korea?
No, I went to Germany.
That's what I thought.
But,
Okay, and then Steve was in Vietnam.
he was in the worst of it, and in 2013, I went to Vietnam and crawled in those tunnels that he said they couldn't talk him into going into when he was there.
Was he infantry?
I don't know, but he was a company clerk.
Okay.
So,
Well, the tunnels were bad places. My brother-in-law was in the tunnels.
yes, well, I can tell you firsthand, it was not nice. I lost my first wife after 54 years of marriage,
I knew that.
and after 3 years of bachelorhood, I married a lady that is a longtime businesswoman here in Morton, and her name was Carol Lindstrom. Carol Lindstrom and her husband were both pilots,
I didn't know she
and they had a total of 7 airplanes altogether. And they, 24 years ago, they flew around the world in an air race, which I thought was probably one of the few people that have done that.
I'm sure that's true, and that's got to be where Bob Raitt got some of his enthusiasm.
Bob Raitt was her brother.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Bob was a pilot.
Right.
Yes.
And a lot of that came from his experience with his sister and his brother-in-law. Yeah,
Probably
You
did.
told me that one.
And
time,
now
yeah.
Carol's oldest son has a plane, and he is a pilot.
I didn't realize that. I don't know if you remember the fella that we hired when we first formed the Economic Development Council, the consultant.
Okay.
And Glenn, can't even think of his last name myself right now. But after having worked with Morton and the Economic Development Council, that's formative stages in the elected officials for a period of, I don't know, maybe a year or so. He told me about time he wrapped up the project. I took him out to lunch, and he said, he said, I've been here for X amount of time. He said, you could run the world from Morton. He had such regard for the experience and capabilities of the people.
Of the people that are here.
They are unusual, I think, in that respect. But when you grew up, this was a pretty small town, mostly farming. The two big influences were Apostolic and Mennonite, and basically agriculture. Was that not correct?
That's true. And actually, Morton was not suited for farming because of its swampy area. It was all swamp, actually, and just a couple of Mortonites got the idea of building field tile to drain this acreage around here, and now it's a high production agricultural area. We have people here that are developing new ways to farm, more modern ways to farm. Town keeps growing, and it's also it excels in a lot of things. Morton Buildings was the largest agricultural building company in the world. I just can't say enough good things about the town.
It's hard not to stop finding good things about Morton. That's why I'm still here.
One of the things that I did, I was very active in the JCs too, and I eventually ended up, I was a state vice president. But in my capacity as a JC, Caterpillar asked us to see if we could get an airport built here in Morton. And so I set out to get all of the pilots in Morton together and see if we could find a location to build an airport. We did find that, and it happened to be parallel to Main Street, and it was right near where Caterpillar was expanding into a new area. We didn't have any money to buy land, but we did have a signed agreement from the owners of the property where we wanted to build the runway to lease the property for a number of years. But after several years of attempting to get it approved, we couldn't get state approval, and the project died. Oh, one of my failures.
Well, there weren't many of them.
Well, the other one was the JCs. We designed a plate for the big farm show that the Yorties were going to have in the 60s. And
oh, yeah. Farm Progress.
we ordered 3,000 of those plates, and we were going to sell those and make money and buy the playground equipment for the parks. Well, there was a large crowd of people showed up. They were all parked on the road trying to get into it, so we had a captive audience. And it was very hot. They didn't want any plates, they wanted water. Had we had bottled water, we'd have made a fortune.
What do you remember? What do you remember about growing up when Morton was a small town? What did people do?
Well, most of the things I remember is how ornery I was. Morton had actually 3 different potteries, and one of those potteries burnt down, and the kilns that they had were still there. They were not ruined or anything. And the pottery company just kind of left everything there.
Right.
And a bunch of us kids found little, they were little mugs. They looked like a barrel that they were making, and they were just right. It was just like a hand grenade. So we would each get in one end of those kilns and throw those little pottery things at each other. And then from that we graduated to BB gun fights. And Red Ryder in their wisdom started making pump air BB guns, and they got too
powerful,
too dangerous for kids playing with them, and so that kind of ended that. I remember in grade school they started to deliver milk to the grade kids in the morning. We would take a break and everybody would drink milk. Well, a few of our more intelligent kids decided we'll go to the bakery and get some of their donuts, and then we'll hand them out at school and make it milk and donuts. Well, our class had one girl that was exceptionally beautiful, and the boys started giving her a donut. Each boy would give her a donut, and it was kind of embarrassing for her because the donuts would pile up on her desk, and some of the girls never got a donut. So that's one of the more amusing memories I have. I did playing sandlot baseball. I managed to be a catcher, and the person that was at bat wanted to hit a home run, and he stepped back to swing and caught my head instead of the ball and knocked me cold. Luckily, my dad was pouring concrete right across the street, and he came over and put a cold rag on my head and got me conscious again. So that's one of the highlights of the week.
What did you do on evenings, weekends?
I was the only person that drove to school in the 8th grade. We lived 2 miles out of town. There was no school buses. And so my parents let me drive the car. And at noon, I would load kids up in that car, and they would sit in the windows and hold hands across the top of the car, and then get it to rock. And we would drive down Main Street with that car rocking one way and then the other. At that time, Morton had one policeman, no police car, and he only had a nightstick. He didn't even have a gun. And so he couldn't do anything. Well, people started telling my dad what I was doing, and that was the end of that.
Was that policeman Bartolome?
Yes. His job was to make sure all the stores were locked when they were supposed to be locked. That was about it.
Okay. Main Street was not very long in those days, though.
No, my dad said that he got to help pour the concrete for Main Street, the first hard street that they had. I remember one night, 1964, I think it was, I bowled late, and I was sitting at the intersection of Main and Jefferson. And Morton had its one stoplight at that time. And the stoplight was red, so I had to stop. There wasn't another car coming. And then all of a sudden, whoof, one of the stores was ablaze. It kind of looked like it blew up. And nobody in the streets. It was blazing away. I just sat there, and no fire truck. No. Finally, the light changed to green, and so I just turned and went to the bowling alley.
Really?
It ended up 3 stores burnt totally. I remember an older man would walk around town, and he never seemed to have a job or anything. His name was Hans Casagrande. Hans Casagrande, everyone he would come and see, he'd say hello, and if you didn't say hello back, he would follow you and keep saying hello. And that's all I remember about him. We had another man from Morton that was in World War I that he had stepped on an explosive device in World War I, and it caused him to never step off a curb without standing and move his foot this way, that way. And it was shell shock then. They have a different name for it now, but
This was back in the days when just about every small town had 2 or 3 people like that.
yeah,
Just barely
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah,
When
they
I was a
didn't-
kid where I grew up.
they were no problem, but
But we talked about Main Street. I'm going to guess that Main Street ran, Jefferson and Main was at the center, so maybe ran from Jackson to, what, Chicago or something maybe at the time, if that?
the
Length of Main Street when you were a
the
kid?
length of Main Street. Well, actually, it was called Tremont Street then. Main, when you go out to Queenwood was not built yet,
Right.
so that's where the town kind of ended. And North Main was right at the railroad track there. I remember band concerts. They would have it right in on Main Street. They had a little problem later with that because that happened to be part of Route 121, Illinois Route 121,
Yeah.
and the state would govern that, and they would say, well, you cannot stop traffic for your band concert. And so that kind of killed the band concerts until the Park District came and built a facility where entertainment could be done.
Wasn't there a little bandstand there at Jefferson and Maine at one time, where the Butler Law Office is now, or near there? I remember something like that when I first moved here.
That was the going way back. That was Gallagher's Dry Goods, that building, and then it was Ben Franklin,
Yep.
and
Okay.
I don't remember that
All right.
being.
Maybe it wasn't there. It might be my imagination.
Where Horseshoe Park was, there was a little gazebo type thing
I
there.
remember that. Yeah. Okay. And you remember the interurban railway?
Yes, I remember that, and the interurban building was tore down, and the First National Bank was built there. And when we was tearing it down, we ran into a cistern, and in digging out that cistern, it was totally full of wine and whiskey bottles, where men would get on that interurban,
Yeah.
and they'd finish their drink and throw it down this hole, which happened to be the cistern. And over the years, that thing filled up with those.
Would that have been from Prohibition?
Could have been. I don't know. Prohibition ended the day and the hour that I was born.
Maybe you caused it.
July 27th,
Wow.
1933. It was the end of Prohibition.
The clue you gave me that made me ask you about Switzerland was when you told me about the original spelling of Aupperle with the Y and the way it was pronounced.
Oh, yeah.
And I just guessed at, and this is my Caterpillar experience traveling over there,
It could have. Go ahead.
Swiss dialect, the pronunciation of the emphasis on words is different than Hochdeutsch.
Okay.
And you can just hear that with the Y on the end. And I thought, I wonder if they could have been in that part of that group, because they all got chased out of Switzerland, you know. The Reformed Church, the official church, but he was extremely cruel to the Anabaptists and basically ran them out.
My grandmother was from Switzerland, and her maiden name was Pertlwitz. Now that sounds Jewish to me.
What is it?
Pertlwitz.
Spell it.
Pertlwitz.
Did you know George Armstrong at Caterpillar? Do you remember him? Was a group president. Lived here many years in Morton.
We did the concrete work for every president of Caterpillar from Earnhardt on up.
Well, he was a group president, not the president.
Okay. No, I probably.
Executive vice president is what we called him back then. and you might have known him, but he lived somewhere here in town, and they talked about the interurban, and people would ride. It's probably the absolute best way to get to Peoria, because automobile traffic would have been unreliable and probably slow. There wasn't a good road. 150 must have been the road. Did you write this, Ken?
Yeah.
It looks like your work. You were a good writer.
Well, it wasn't easy. You're writing my life story, and you'll probably find that out when you go through it there.
Writing is hard work.
You know, this is the 30 years since the Roth did their book here.
Yeah.
This is the 30th year, and I thought more we should lean to try and pick up from that, the last 30 years, what happened.
Yeah.
And there are so many good people that aren't mentioned in this book that have been here and gone probably, that we should try to remember them too.
Yeah.
But,
I've been asked.
I had real good luck hiring high school kids, you know, that they're a co-op thing. And,
Yes.
and that, and one of them, he was so good. I made him manager of my rental store. I owned Cook Rental, and he went on to become the head of Martinville's streets, and
Oh.
Randy Sweeter's his name.
Oh.
Well,
thank you.
I love this town, and I love the people in it, and hopefully they won't forget me when I'm gone.
No, we won't forget you.